A peculiar story unfolded in the year 1978 at Lake Vouliagmeni. An Air Force sergeant, an airman, and her brother decided to venture into the dark water of the Sunken Lake when things took a deadly turn. Lake Vouliagmeni, meaning Sunken Lake, is a small lake with brackish water located south of Vouliagmeni, Athens, Greece. It's fed by underground currents from Mount Hymettus. About 2,000 years ago, the roof of the cave that once concealed the lake collapsed, revealing the lake to the world. The lake was named Vouliagmeni, meaning sunken, and the surrounding area also took on this name. The lake is part of a system that includes 3 caves, 2 smaller ones and a larger one, which is possibly one of the biggest underwater chambers in Europe. The main cave has a length of around 2,290 feet. Expert cave divers, who are highly trained and well-equipped, can swim nearly a kilometer along the cave's edges. The cave's average depth is 328 feet, with the deepest point reaching 426 feet, and the chamber's width can stretch up to 262 feet in certain areas. Visibility in the water can exceed 197 feet, and divers' lights have been seen from as far as 656 feet away. The surface water temperature of Lake Vouliagmeni is around 70 degrees Fahrenheit in winter and can go up to 84 degrees Fahrenheit in summer. In the caves, starting from a depth of 65 feet, the temperature remains steady between 79 and 82 degrees Fahrenheit. The water is brackish down to 131 feet, and below that depth, it turns into seawater. The lake has a unique environment that's fed by warm seawater through an underground channel connected to a network of flooded caves. A freshwater spring also mixes with the seawater, making it brackish. The lake extends deep into the mountain through an underwater cave that has never been fully explored. Even sonar equipment hasn't been able to map the cave's end. Many diving expeditions have tried to chart it, but a few amateur divers have drowned in the process. Because of its consistently warm water and high hydrogen sulfide content, the lake has been used as a spa since the late 19th century. 21-year-old Mark Grandroth worked in his family's paint contracting business and was passionate about sports. His sister, Jan Grandroth, 20 years old, was an Air Force airman, outgoing and just as athletic. She joined the military to find direction in her life. Jan graduated from Encina High School, while Mark attended Rio Americano High School. Jan had been diving for 2 years, and Mark was also a certified diver. As they got older, both Mark and Jan stayed busy with their careers. Outside of work, Mark spent as much time as possible cycling, hiking, backpacking, and diving, a hobby he quickly grew to love. The Air Force became everything Jan had hoped for. She was stationed at Hellinikon Air Base, just outside Athens, Greece. While there, she became friends with Donald Michaud, a 32-year-old from Maine who shared her passion for diving. Donald, who was about 10 years older than Jan, was a diving instructor, and they spent a lot of time diving together in Greece. By the spring of 1978, Mark Grandroth was ready for a change. Working in the family paint contracting business in Sacramento wasn't fulfilling him anymore, and he felt a need to do something different, much like his sister Jan had done by joining the Air Force. When Jan suggested he visit her in Greece, Mark saw it as the perfect opportunity to break away from his routine and explore the world. Jan, who missed her brother dearly, encouraged him to come, promising to show him around the country and take him diving at some of the best dive sites in the area. Mark was excited about the adventure and thought it was just what he needed to recharge. At that time, both Mark and Jan were relatively experienced divers. Although Jan had only been diving for a few years, she was already quite skilled. In early September 1978, Mark arrived in Greece, eager to reunite with his sister. They spent the first few days catching up and visiting some of Greece's most famous historical landmarks. But no matter where they went or what they saw, their minds kept drifting back to their upcoming dive. The excitement was building, and they couldn't stop talking about it. On September 9th, the day of the dive, they met up with Donald Michaud. The three of them were looking forward to an unforgettable experience, exploring the underwater world together. When they arrived at Lake Vouliagmeni, Mark was thrilled to see that it was just as beautiful and awe-inspiring as Jan had described. The crystal clear water and the serene surroundings made it the perfect spot for their adventure. As they prepared for the dive, excitement filled the air. Donald, the oldest and most experienced diver among them, was chosen as the dive leader. In 1978, diving gear and training weren't as advanced as they are today, and the divers made some critical mistakes. First, they didn't bring adequate lighting, even though they knew the cave complex would be completely dark with no natural light. In addition to this oversight, they failed to carry spare air tanks. This was likely because they expected the dive to be short and relatively easy, and they didn't want to carry the extra weight. However, not bringing spare tanks meant that if they used more oxygen than planned or encountered problems, they wouldn't have any reserves to rely on. Perhaps their most surprising mistake was their failure to anchor a guideline near the entrance of the cave before going inside. In cave diving, this is one of the most important safety rules, as a guideline can lead divers back to the entrance if they become disoriented in the dark. Without it, they risk getting lost in the maze-like passages of the cave. The dive began at the entrance below the steep cliffs on the lake's north side. Getting to the entrance was easy, but as soon as they started to descend, they were surprised by the strong inward flow of water through the narrow opening. The current was so forceful that they felt like they were being sucked into the cave. On one hand, this was helpful because it meant they wouldn't have to use much energy to go deeper into the cave. But on the other hand, they knew that getting out would be much more difficult, especially if they were tired and running low on oxygen at the end of the dive. The current could become even stronger and more unpredictable inside the cave, making the return journey even more challenging. Despite these concerns, they didn't think it would be a major issue since they didn't plan to go too far into the cave complex. They were confident in their abilities and excited about the dive, unaware of the potential dangers that lay ahead. They swam through the narrow entrance and into the dark cave. Inside, they found themselves in a large chamber with two huge vertical rock formations called chimneys. They paused briefly to take in the impressive sight before continuing about 400 feet deeper into the cave. Eventually, they reached another narrow passage that was just wide enough for them to squeeze through. On the other side, they could see what looked like an even bigger chamber, but the current was much stronger here than at the start of the dive. Before moving forward, they tried to shine their lights into the next chamber to see what was ahead, but the darkness was so deep that the lights barely made a difference. All they could tell was that the ground sloped down steeply, disappearing into the blackness. Without knowing exactly how big the chamber was, they let go of the rocky wall and allowed the strong current to push them into the large room. After entering the chamber, something went wrong. Donald, Mark, and Jan lost sight of the entrance and became disoriented in the pitch-black darkness. Their movements stirred up fine silt on the cave floor, and within seconds, they couldn't see anything at all. They were now trapped deep inside the cave, with the strong current pulling them even further in. If they tried to swim against the current, they could easily end up going deeper into the cave instead of finding their way out. They had no idea where they were or how to get back to the entrance, so they started to panic. The darkness, combined with the strong current, made it impossible to know which direction to swim. On top of that, they might have been experiencing nitrogen narcosis, which can cloud a diver's thinking, making it harder to stay calm. What started as an exciting dive quickly turned into a frightening and dangerous situation. When Donald, Mark, and Jan didn't resurface after a few hours, the police and search and rescue divers arrived quickly to look for them. They thoroughly searched the lake and the area just inside the cave entrance. There was no sign of the missing divers. As part of the search, authorities released a large amount of dye near the cave's entrance to track the water flow inside the cave, hoping this would help them figure out which way the divers had gone. Unfortunately, even with this method, the search and rescue divers found nothing. Elite divers from both the American and Greek navies were brought in shortly after, but they had no better luck than the initial search teams. By the next morning, it became clear to everyone that there was very little chance the divers were still alive. Their only hope would have been if they found an air pocket inside the cave before their air tanks ran out, especially since they didn't have any spare tanks with them. Despite the slim chances, dedicated searchers continued to explore deeper into the cave system over the following days. However, the search was eventually called off after one diver barely escaped with his life when a strong current tore off his face mask and pulled him deeper into the cave. The dangers of continuing the search were too great, and the effort was abandoned. Mark and Jan's father, Russell, flew to Greece to find out what happened to his children, fearing the worst, but wanting to make sure everything possible was being done. 2 weeks after they disappeared, Greek authorities declared the 3 divers dead, even though their bodies were never found. However, their mother, Fran, refused to believe they had died in a diving accident, holding on to hope that they might still be alive and being held captive. She started writing letters to various officials, including President Jimmy Carter, but felt she wasn't getting the full truth about what really happened. In 1990, a photographer searching for the missing Americans died in the caves. Russell Granroth died in 1992, without answers about his children. The lake was closed to the public in 1995, and Fran Granroth moved back to Minnesota and remarried in 1997, accepting that the disappearance might never be solved. In 2006, the situation took a turn when volunteer divers from the Panhellenic Association of Frogmen discovered the remains of 2 divers in the cave. The first 2 bodies were found stuck in tight crevices, one 165 feet and the other 130 feet from the cave entrance. Shortly after, a third body was found nearby. The Department of Forensic Medicine and Toxicology at the University of Athens initially tried to identify the remains, but eventually handed the task over to the military. Extensive DNA testing by the Department of Defense Armed Forces Medical Examiner confirmed the remains of U.S. Air Force Sergeant Donald Michaud, Airman Jan Granroth, and her brother Mark Granroth. Interestingly, one of the divers' tanks still contained air after nearly 30 years. This led to suspicions that their deaths might have been caused by something other than suffocation or drowning. However, the bodies were too decomposed for any physical identification, so the exact cause of death remained unknown. Funeral services for Jan and Mark Granroth were held on August 4th. Their mother, Fran, found some comfort knowing that the long and painful family ordeal was finally coming to an end. Donald Michaud's remains were buried at St. Joseph's Church in Biddeford, Maine. Donald left behind his wife, Rosemary, and their children. Both Donald and Jan were given full military honors for their service. We would like to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed watching, take a dive on the like and subscribe buttons and hit the bell icon so you get notified when we come back with another exciting cave diving story.